technically they could come to Belgrade. I am not bluffing here and bragging, it could have happened. The question is that we all understood that we will not be able to return because we don't have too much of a backing and we don't have enough military equipment. We go too far away from the Ukrainian border, we would be circled then by the military force, and then they would kill everybody, so we will die as heroes. But what's next? We need to redo the whole thing.
Welcome to the Black Sky. My name is Piotr Mateusz Bobołowicz, and our guest today is Ilya Ponomarev, member of the Executive Council of the People's Deputies Congress.
Nice to meet you, as usual.
Nice to meet you. It's been, so-called election time in Russia.
Elections?
Have you voted?
Really?
Have you
Elections?
voted?
No, there was no elections. There was some electoral procedure, a certain imitation that Vladimir Putin has designed for himself, but it's very far from elections. I never in my life missed any elections. At one point in time, it was in 2018, I believe that I casted the most expensive ballot in the Russian history because I'm officially a criminal in Russia, so I cannot come on the premises of any of the Russian embassies. But I wanted to vote on the day of the elections. And the only office that was theoretically accessible for me was an honorary consulate in Portugal, in Porto. So I had to travel. That time I was in the US. I traveled to Barcelona. From Barcelona, I took car to travel to Porto. From Porto, I went back to Barcelona. Then I flew back to Ukraine. So that was the price of that vote. So I am taking very seriously the election procedure, and I never want to miss this. But what was happening now, so these 3 days, it was very far from being called an election.
If it was not an election, and I agree with you on this topic, what should the Western world do now? How should we call Putin? As if it's not election, he's not president.
Look, if you don't know what to do, behave according to the law. Stick to the law. It's very simple. It's the right thing to do. His term is about to expire on May 6, 2024. May 7, 2024, he is no longer the president of the Russian Federation because he has no right to run. Very simple. So that's why I think that all people of goodwill, all countries of goodwill, they have to say, 7th of May, the guy is no longer a president. Yeah, he could be the chief, the big boss, the mafia godfather. We can call him differently the way you like. He is still the leader of the country de facto. He is the usurper, he is the dictator, but he is not the president of the Russian Federation. So just stop calling him the president of the Russian Federation. As simple.
Do you think that Russia is still an authoritarian country, or is it moving towards totalitarianism? Is it already there?
Unfortunately, it is moving towards totalitarianism. I don't think it is there because totalitarianism is about mind control. Autocracy is about control over your actions, but you're still allowed in the kitchen, in private, to express different opinions. You just should not express them in public. And that's where Russia is right now. But we see the growing number, like in Stalin times, when people report each other, writing letters to FSB and to other services, and people are becoming more and more cautious, even talking over the phone. We already have an example when one person called another person. They were like pretty ordinary people, and their phone line was tapped against their knowledge. Obviously, they didn't know that it was tapped. And because of that, they were speaking something bad about war. They both were prosecuted and sent to prison. And then in the court, they were saying, okay, we were saying this in public. So according to the letter of law, you shouldn't express public opinion about the war. And the judge said, the police officers who were listening to you, they were the public. So that's why I'm sending you to jail.
And what do you think about this opposition inside of Russia? Those little acts like throwing this green paint into the ballot box, or this Yulia Navalnaya's action of voting at 12 o'clock to somehow block the commissions. I don't really understand what was the purpose. What do you think about those little forms of protests?
Look, first of all, those people who were sending ink, or some people even were throwing Molotov cocktails at the ballot boxes. I think it was like heroic action. That means that people totally understood that these are not elections. They wanted to protest, but I think that's the wrong way of protest, because you just without any sense sacrificing yourself. And you could do the same thing by attacking, a refinery, a military cargo train, Kremlin, United Russia office, at least something, of political and military importance. So I'm very proud of those people. But, I would have advised them against doing particularly that, but at least it was the movement in the right direction. About the activities of noon 17th, which was called for by Yulia Navalnaya and many other members of Russian peaceful, and we now even have this in Russian. There is game of words. Mirny means peaceful. Smirny means tame. So we're calling them tamed opposition. So these representatives of tamed opposition, they were saying, so come and vote at noon, and everybody would see the crowd, and everybody would recognize there is a lot of us. But the reality is that Putin actually wanted the crowds. It was his primary objective, because he anyway is creating whatever result he wants to. He's stuffing the ballot boxes with false ballots. He's just using so-called electronic voting. It's even already is made the research out of 70 million votes approximately that he has collected, 32 were just thrown into the ballot boxes. It's already known. It's already calculated using mathematical methods. But anyway, he could draw whatever he wanted. So it was clear that we cannot affect the bottom line. But those who were calling for the action at noon were saying, so at least we will see each other. We don't care what others would see. We don't care how Putin would display this, but we will see each other, and we understand there is a lot of us still there in Russia. We can touch each other and say that we are still alive. That was the meaning of the action. But we, as Congress of People's Deputies, saying, okay, so let's do something at noon if you want at noon. And I am personally with the people at the front lines. We at noon were actually fighting. We came to the polling stations, but with arms, in Kursk and Belgorod region, and that was the ideal way what to do during the election day. But you can even do some active boycott measures. Still, this concept of noon bankrupted, because it was used by some people who pretended they are oppositionists, but they in fact working in cooperation with Kremlin, to say, let's give all our votes for one of those candidates. And they selected the guy whose name was Davankov, who was a relatively liberal candidate. Obviously, it was a fake spoiler. And instead, what some, at least more morally oriented people were saying, so let's put the name of Navalny into the ballot. So at least we express, solidarity with the person that Putin has murdered in prison. So instead of putting Navalny in the name of the ballot, they were voting for Davankov. And look at the results here in Warsaw. 50% Davankov, 15% Navalny. So that means that that hero lost to some Kremlin's spoiler. And what did Davankov do the very next day? He came to Putin in public and say, Mr. Putin, I have done everything for you. You are the only person who can create peace. Let's squash those Ukrainians. That's the candidate that, those crowds here in Warsaw were voting for. It's a shame. It's a shame. That means this whole thing is scam. And these political technologists of the opposition who were calling to come to the polling stations, they are at best not very bright people.
You and the Congress, you are elected politicians. At one point, you were all elected in Russian Federation at different
Yeah, that's
levels.
why we know what are real elections, yes.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And one day, as I understand, you want to create a new body and to be elected once again to some form of government or parliament of new Russia.
Well, some of members of Congress,
yes,
they want. I personally don't.
Okay. But how do you imagine the same people who are voting for Putin? Because it's not that people are not voting for him. Of course, the election is it's a sham election. Well, he's throwing votes for him in millions, but still, many people, about half of the voters, voted for Putin. Really voted for Putin, according to different research. And some people voted for Davankov, as you said, who is not a real oppositioner, who's not oppositioner at all. And how do you imagine those people, the same people, the citizens of Russian Federation, voting for, maybe not you, as you said, but for your colleagues who want to really change the country?
So look, it all depends on the angle you view the situation with. Okay, let's say even 50% voted for Putin. It's less, as I said, just with the research. But let's say 50% of people voted for Putin at a turnout of 60% or same 50%. That means that Putin collected in the country 30% of the votes. That's bloody a lot, but that's not the majority. And that means in the current circumstances, with all the brainwashing, with all the push, that was even punishment for people not coming to the polling stations. There were enterprises, production facilities who were just enforcing their people to come to vote. And that means still, 70% didn't come or voted otherwise. And that means they are against Putin. So the situation is not doomed. This particular glass is not half empty, it's half full. Now it's even, you see, 3/4 full. And that's how I take the situation. It's still awful that we have 30% of Russians who are Putinists. But just with the propaganda machine, with the TV, with the atmosphere of fear, it's natural, and I am certain that, a year after Putin is gone, this number would be slashed 10 times. Because when people would see what whom Putin actually was, and what was he doing, and the corruption, and his sexual exploits, and the warmongering, and what were his people doing, and his past, and his criminal activities, I think that people would start to realize and come into terms with it. Just right now they have no other option. And that's why it's 30%, but it's just 30%.
Yes, but for years, people had access to internet, had access to independent media. There were some independent media in Russia before. Right now, we know the Russian language media, Russian independent media are not in Russia, of course, and still people decided to at least not do anything against Putin and not to do anything against the war.
Look, Germans in 1940s were living in their towns, and right across the street there was concentration camps with a black smoke coming from the chimneys of crematoriums of Jews being burnt there. And they still said they knew nothing about this. That's exactly the same thing was happening in Russia. What you would do with this truth? We have a media channel called February Morning that we are running from Ukraine, telling people what's happening at the field of war and with the civilians' deaths and whatever. After we published what was happening in Bucha, for a while, our growth, which was like this, totally stalled. Why? Because for people, this truth was so disturbing, was so inconvenient, they don't want to hear it. And I understand them, because when you're saying to someone, you are the fascist, and then the person say, okay, even if he says like, get lost, I don't want to be the fascist, I disagree with this. Or if he internally understands that maybe it's right, then what should I do about it? I should take a machine gun and go and fight, but not so many people are ready for this. They have kids, they have job, they have relatives, they have their father and mother to take care of, and they say, okay, so it's like, okay, so what should I do? And this is a very, very inconvenient truth. So they are not looking for it at all. They're just like waiting for the situation to change. But when it would change, they would immediately say, this bloody Putin made us fascists. Shame on him. And I can say that if we will not protect Putin from the mob, his death would be very unpleasant. And we saw examples of Gaddafi and others. That's the way, things may go if we will not take care of this otherwise.
So what should the Russian citizens do? What do you think those people who oppose Putin but are now inside of Russia, what should they do? What can they do?
No, on the 17th of March in Kiev, we had an event which was called Forum to Support Russian military resistance. And they were supporting people at the front lines, and they were supporting resistance movement inside Russia. So it was Russian political opposition, the radical part of it, was coming to Kiev and expressing their support. And there were people who never have been to Kiev before. And they met with the representatives of the resistance fighters. And one of actually fresh comers to the resistance movement, she's a fantastic lady. She was a supermodel in France, Russian origin. And she moved to France relatively recently, and so she was modeling in Russia, and she became a star in France. But then in 2023, she said, enough is enough, I want to join the resistance. And she came, her nickname is Star, Zirka in Ukrainian, and so she's like fantastic looking, like a supermodel girl, and she became a medic, a field medic in the regiment, and she was giving a speech saying, "Look at me. You would never imagine me with a rifle, with firing a cannon, and I'm not." And many people don't know how to do it. It's okay. You can still join. You can still do your thing. We will find place for everyone. Who knows how to drive a car will drive a car. Who knows how to treat people will treat people. Who knows how to cook will cook. There are like many things that you can actually do in the army, but fighting against Putinism, against the aggression. Okay, you are afraid of coming too close to the front lines? Do your part, promote this. Help us recruit new members. Talk to them. Explain what we are doing. So there would be more Russians who would be supportive. You don't have information resources? Okay, just talk to your friends. Spread the word. Create a public anticipation that the change is coming, that it's not doomed. You don't have any more friends in Russia? Help us financially. There's so many things that you can actually do. Just don't sit and do nothing. Don't go to the polling stations helping Vladimir Putin. Do the fight.
Those free Russian troops fighting on the side of Ukraine that entered Belgorod and Kursk regions during this so-called election time, And are they going to stay there? Is it just go and leave action? Because it's not the first time; it's already second time.
It's not even the second time.
Well, the second time we officially know that they entered. So, is it something bigger or just small?
So it's just a little bit of history, so that our viewers would understand this. The first incursion into Russian territory by Russian troops happened in March 2023, almost exactly 1 year ago. It was like around 10th of March, I don't remember the exact date, but it was almost exactly 1 year ago. It was done by Russian volunteer corps. It was in Bryansk region. It was a small operation, but nevertheless it created a huge splash. It was the first time, Russian guys, inside Russia. Putin was saying, those bloody saboteurs. But he was saying it's Ukrainians. I was saying, we're genuine Russians. Everybody knew their faces, so they were genuine Russians. Nevertheless, that was the first time. So then, end of May, beginning of June, there was the first large-scale operation jointly by Russian Volunteer Corps and Legion Freedom of Russia in Belgorod region. And it lasted for 2 weeks. It was several raids, firstly one direction, then another direction. People were controlling 2 of the district centers in Belgorod region. In fact, at that time, the resistance was pretty slow and incapable, and technically they could come to Belgorod. I'm not bluffing here and bragging, it could have happened. The question is that we all understood that we will not be able to return because we don't have too much of a backing and we don't have enough military equipment. We go too far away from the Ukrainian border, we would be circled then by the military force, and then they would kill everybody, so we will die as heroes. But what's next? We need to redo the whole thing from the very beginning. So we showed the flag. We came back. Then fall and winter was the time when we were doing in-raids into Russia every 10 days, more or less. But there were small operations here and there, reconnaissance, particular attacks on the particular military objects, training of people, etc. Now, what is happening is, for the first time, joint operation of all 3 Russian regiments, Legion Freedom of Russia, RVC, and Siberian Battalion. It's more broad. It's taking place in 2 regions: Kursk region, where Legion operates, and Belgorod region, where RVC and Siberian Battalion operate. For the second time, we took over a district center called Graiver, and for the second time, mayor of that city ran away, just fled. But Kursk region is more serious because it's more serious opposition from Putinist forces. It's airborne Rangers of Ivanova, which are dispatched there. So it's more serious opposition. That's for the first time we are going with tanks, with heavy armory. But still we lack military equipment, which is needed if we want to control the territory long-term, particularly artillery. Artillery in Ukraine predominantly right now is Western. And that's a question of shells, because we don't have production of Russian caliber 152, 122 millimeter shells. So we have to take Western shells, so with the Western artillery. And as you perfectly know, it's explicitly prohibited to use any of the Western military equipment on the territory of Russia. That means, that our hands are tied. So to cut it short, we want to liberate and permanently establish control on a certain piece of land. We will try. Maybe it would work. I think that the chances, like 1 out of 10, that would happen. Anyway, that's something that we are keeping in mind. We definitely would not do this at the expense of serious losses of our guys. We don't have that many of them yet. And at the end of the day, our objective is to go to Moscow. Obviously, it's still unchanged.
What could change the situation? What could help you get to Moscow? What would be, what would create the perfect opportunity? I was thinking, because there are also Chechens fighting, and there is a Chechen battalion fighting.
Yeah, by the way, they joined Russian Volunteer Corps and Siberian Battalion in Belgorod region, which is to a degree ironic, because, you know, Russian Volunteer Corps, many people don't like them because they are created of people of ultra-right political background. And I personally, I am very much to the left myself. So we are kind of at the opposite sides of the political spectrum. Legion Freedom of Russia is very mainstream politically. We have all the different shades, but nobody to the extreme, neither to the left nor to the right. But in RVC, a lot of people who are very right-wing, and in Siberian Battalion, a lot of people who are very much left-wing. So these two Russian groups are working together very much to the right, very much to the left. Plus, they're joined by Chechens, which is an ethnic minority, and usually ultra-right people, they don't like people who are coming from North Caucasus. They're usually fighting migrants, and that's the tension that they create in the society. But now, this war united all this idiocy, you know, put behind. They are fighting together, and that's fantastic. I think that's an indication that we shouldn't talk about the political stuff which dismembers people, disunites them, and talk about what makes them a whole.
But do you think there is a chance to open the second front on Caucasus, in Chechnya, or for some uprising in Belarus, something like this that would help disintegrate Russian Federation?
The second front long time ago opened already. It's the resistance movement in the home front. Look what's happening. You see now every day refineries are put on fire. Do you think it's possible just to send a drone without a person on the ground who would navigate the drone to a particular refinery unit? It's impossible. So these operations would not work without Russians resistance groups helping them. We spent a lot of time and a lot of effort. And I would say that right now the number of people who are on the ground outnumbers number of people who are at the front lines as 10-1. Because there are a lot of people who were applying, for example, to the Legion, but we couldn't get them because, for example, in Poland to get visa for a person just to transit to Ukraine, it's a nightmare. It's a great problem, and that's why many people who theoretically wanted to join us, they have to stay in Russia, and then they are joining the resistance movement on the ground. We still are trying to get as many as possible to come to us, but that's why the ratio is like it's almost 1-10, the number of people at the front lines and number of people in the home front.
Let's move to a bit different part of war, to economy.
Mm-hmm.
Right now in Poland, one of the main subjects are the protests of agricultural protests against changes in European Union, but also against import from Ukraine. But as it's already established and it's well known right now that it's not Ukrainian grain that's the problem, it's Russian grain that affected the markets, the world market and the market in European Union, and affected the price of grain. So how to cope with this weapon of Russia, which is grain, which is food, agricultural export to the world? What could European Union, what could Poland and Ukraine do in this situation?
Oh, look, two things. First of all, of course, what's happening is a lot the internal thing for the European Union and the relationship between the Poland and European Union in general. And I personally wish Poland, which I like so much, to become more influential in the European Union and push its own agenda. And I think that the future for this increased influence is within the alliance between Poland and Ukraine as part of European Union. And in general, I like so much the idea of the Lublin Triangle, because I think that's the new UNIF that would help to counterbalance Western Europeans inside the European Union. And I wish for the time when Russia would join this as a free and liberated Russia. But right now, obviously, it's Ukraine, Poland, and Baltic states which can do fight, pressure, and insist on its position. And that's one thing. But another thing, we should understand the origin of the problem. And as you correctly said, the origin of the problem is in Kremlin. So we can always treat whatever consequences, and there are about the natural gas supplies and about the farming and then agriculture exports, and there are many others. But the origin is in Kremlin. And that's why we all should say to each other and say to these farmers, I just met yesterday, by the way, transiting to Poland. They're nice guys, they have their problem, and they want to solve their problem. They are, I think, very much misguided by the politicians who are telling them what to do. They doing right now a lot of damage, but I do understand they have to feed their families at the end of the day. So I feel sorry for them. But they need to understand that the origin of their problem is not in Ukraine. And it's not even in Brussels. It's in Moscow. And we need to treat that. We need to eliminate Putinism. And the Polish government needs also to say, let's eliminate Putinism as the origin of that problem. Let's take care about the source and not try to treat the consequences of that illness.
As you mentioned, many people think the problem is in Ukraine. So the tension in relations between Poland and Ukraine is quite elevated right now. But
Very unfortunately.
I would like to speak about other tension, because still the most hated nation in Poland is Russia, of course, and Russian people. And one day the government will change, Russia will be liberated, and what then? What to do? How to reincorporate Russian society into the world, into this normal, civilized, law-obedient world? What to do with those tensions, this lack of trust, as it was, well, with Germany after the Second World War?
Well, I think that for many years, for centuries actually, the world was making this mistake about Russia by saying, it's too large to change. We cannot influence. We can always try to strike one deal or another. Or when we don't like what's going on, we need to put one or another containment policy. But we actually need help to reform the country, to reform the society, with the best intention for our own people. I genuinely believe that human societies are extremely fluid. And we always like to talk about mentality that lasts for ages and ages. No, my personal experience and my knowledge of history shows that the public opinion, the inclination of society, the relationships, they are changing actually very quickly. And look at Germany. That's the best example. Or look at the relationship between the US and the UK. Or look just at the development of countries like Australia, which was created by just criminals, outcasts of the society. Look how well they are doing. It's just a matter of putting the right institutions and creating the right conditions for the people to evolve in the right direction.
But all the examples you've given, those are at least dozens of years or even centuries, as in case of UK-USA relations. So how much time will be needed to reform Russia, to reform the society?
No, look, after the horrible Second World War, which superseded the First World War, and which created the worst nightmare in the history of humanity, the total normalization of that society, what was 20 years, and probably The culmination was Willy Brandt's coming to Warsaw and standing on his knees and praying. And Willy Brandt, before that, was fighting inside the coalition forces against Germany. And he returned to Germany as part of these coalition forces, which many would say invaders, occupants. But he was elected later as a chancellor of the new Germany and democratized the country. For me, it's a great personal example of how we can do things, and I think it's a perfect proof that everything is possible. It's just that you mentioned earlier when we started talking about our transitional parliament, and you're saying that people are thinking about running to the new parliament. And I said at that moment that I am not thinking about this. Why? Because I think that every time political leaders, they try to design the system for their personal favor. And I can tell you, as a lawmaker, it's very hard to resist the temptation. When you are actually writing the rules of the game, you are thinking about where are you in this game. And if you take an obligation that we here are the transitional thing, we designing the new system collectively in a democratic fashion, inviting everyone to participate, and not just Russians, by the way. Right now, they're doing a great job in Kennan Institute in the United States on the new constitutional design. I'm really thankful for them. They are so surprised. They say Russians always were coming to present themselves. For the first time, you actually guys are asking our advice, what we could actually do and what we are advising you not to do. So we need to design the system, but then we need to step aside. And we don't need to be the active players. We have plenty of Russian opposition leaders who want them to run, want to come to power, become prime ministers, lead the country. And that's perfect. We need to make sure that they will be able to, that will be free and fair elections, that the will of the society would be adequately reflected, that people would have the right to choose, but the institutions had to be pre-designed, imposed on the society with the will of international community, Ukraine, Poland, European Union, United States, the countries who were successful already in their democratic transition. And that would make Russia a part of democratic family.
I've been observing the Congress for quite some time. I think it's been
fifth plenary session. Yeah.
So yeah, I've been to probably all of them before, and I've seen it's actually quite difficult to agree on many things, and there are many points that spark debate quite quite emotional.
We have democracy, debate. Yes, it's a real democracy.
So
yes.
How are you dealing with it? Are there questions that are too difficult to approach right now, or?
The more difficult things are, the better it is to approach them. We shouldn't be afraid of those difficulties. On the previous plenary session, we have this experience, one of my very good friends, who is the totally opposite side of the political spectrum from me, Andrei Larionov. That is one of our greatest economists, and he was the father of Putin's economic success in the early 2000s. I was always saying, Andrei, let's write the basic law about the economic strategy in the future Russia. And I was saying, no, Ilya, we shouldn't do it. Let's discuss politics, but let's never touch economy, because we will get into fights, because there are people who are to the left, there are people who are to the right. That's a conflicting issue. That would ruin our Congress. We would split. It's like we'll get into the fight. You know what? That's the only law in the history of the Congress who was passed unanimously at the end of the day. Yes, after tough discussion for one day, a lot of compromises. I think that the law lost certain important things that I would personally prefer to keep there. But nevertheless, it's a great basic law that set up the direction the country would actually go. And again, it was passed unanimously. So we know how to cooperate. We know how to debate, because we are debating not about personalities, we are debating around the ideas. People who are sitting here, they all have vast parliamentary experience behind them. So we know how to write papers. There is no such body inside the Russian opposition whatsoever. More, I would say that I don't know in the human history the example of a shadow parliament. Probably the closest thing that I can think of was actually the American experience, where the founding fathers were, when they had this initial Congress, which was kind of not an official parliament. It was like before that they passed the new constitution, which actually was the cradle of the new state. So we can say that that was also the shadow parliament. But then we have great example to follow, and that's exactly something that we have in mind. And that Congress was directly engaged in the military resistance to the British, and that were the people who were driving the American Revolution. I very much hope that people who are in this audience would be the same founding fathers for the new Russian Republic.
I have one last question. Olympic Games are approaching, and many people in the West say that we should not mix politics with sport, we should not mix politics with culture. Do you think it's possible to not mix politics with culture, with sport? Should we invite Russian sportsmen to the Olympic Games, to some other championships? Should we organize concerts of Russian musicians and other events like this?
Oh, look, I think that there shouldn't be any censorship. But if we consider this aggression as the form of a modern-day fascism, and I think that's what it is, then we should make clear that no people who were part of Russian military, who were part of the Russian government, who were publicly speaking for the war, should be allowed neither as sportsmen or artists, cultural people, whatever. They shouldn't be just allowed to come to the West. Doesn't matter what they do. Again, that's the regulation that you were passing a long time ago. It has to be just enforced. And I think that this debate about the Olympics and whatever is kind of the debate of making an exception. Yes, we all understand that, people who are warmongers shouldn't come to the European, but if they are sportsmen, let's think, maybe we would admit it. Why? It has to be a universal approach. And if such people want to come, they first need to do very simple things. They need to condemn the war. They need to resign from all the government positions whatsoever, but mainly speak publicly against the war. And that would make you to the right side. And obviously, if you're speaking about the Olympic Games, which is always with the flag, and it's always been used politically to promote the flag, obviously, Russian flag should not be allowed, because Russian Olympic Committee, who is the bearer of the flag, should not be allowed. But if individuals who are saying that we are against the war, we're helping Ukraine, we're helping the resistance movement, and whatever, we should forbid them from participating. It's one approach. It has to be universal for every person who is coming to the West. You are for the war? Get off.
Let's hope in the next Olympic Games we'll see Russians under white, blue, white flag.
Yes. No, we had this idea. We were debating this even at the Congress of trying to establish a Free Russia Olympic Committee and promote it. Unfortunately, we have just limited resources, time, and people. We have several very interesting sports people here at the Congress who were previously also MPs. But not probably enough, but maybe I'm very hopeful for the next Olympic Games will already be in Moscow, and it will already be a new Russia, and we already have no need to have this debate because there would be no war, and prosperity for everyone, and one society for everyone, and decent people participating in the cultural and sports and other life.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for talking to me.